to the last video of lesson 3.1. In the previous video, we talked about what happened if you multiplied a function by a number greater than 1 and what happened when we multiplied a function by a number that was less than 1 but still bigger than 0. So I'm sure you're all dying to know what happens if you multiply by a negative. Well, what happens is you get a reflection. So I know we're all going to stop and think about Mulan for a second, but multiplying by a -1 or by any negative number, all it does is reflects the function over the x-axis. So using this graph, we're going to multiply 3 to the x by -1 and see what happens when we reflect that over the x-axis. Well, let's do another t-chart and think about this. When I have an x value of -1, 3 to the -1 power is equal to 1/3. So that's why at -1 we have this fraction value here. 3 to the 0 power is 1. That's where this ordered pair came from. And 3 to the first power is 3, which is why we have this ordered pair here. If I reflect that by -1, then what my equation is going to become is it's going to be f of x equals -3 to the x, or -1 times 3 to the x, however you want to write that. So when I do my t-chart, then I'm going to have x and y. I'm going to plug in those same numbers, but this time when I plug in a -1, I'm going to have -1 times 3 to the -1. Well, remember, you do your exponents first, then you multiply. So what I end up with is -1 times 1/3, and -1 times 1/3 is -1/3. So at -1, I'm going down here to -1/3. When I plug in 0, I'm going to have -1 times 3 to the 0. Again, I do my exponents first, which means I get -1 times 1, which is -1. So at 0, I'm going down to -1. And then my last one, I'm going to have -1 times 3 to the first power. 3 to the first is 3, but -1 times 3 is -3. So then I get, at 1, I get an ordered pair of 1, -3. And so what I have is this exponential curve that is the exact same thing, just flipped over that x-axis. It's the mirror image. If you want to see a prettier version, let's go to Desmos real quick. I've got my 3 to the x here. If I multiply that by a -1, or just put negative in front of it, then all it does is take that orange line, or not line, but that orange curve, and flips it over. So adding and subtracting that negative, all it does is flips it over. All right, let's go ahead and look at this example. What this example does is it takes all of the different transformations we've talked about and puts it into one big function. So you have this parent function of 4 to the x, and it's been transformed into this. If I wanted to describe all of those transformations, what I would do is go through and look at all the things that are extra, that are more than just the 4 to the x. Well, I've got a negative there. So a negative means it's been reflected over the x-axis. The next thing I notice, so I've taken care of my negative, the next thing I notice is it's been multiplied by 3. Recall from video 3 that multiplying by a number larger than 1 is a vertical stretch by a factor of 3. Okay, so that's taken care of. My 4 and my x, those are the parent function. So they're not they don't constitute a change at all. The next thing though is I've got this -2. Subtracting inside the parentheses or with the variable moves it to the right 2 spaces. And then that last one, so I've taken care of my subtraction of 2, and then I've got adding 6. Adding to the entire function, not just the variable, moves it up 6 spaces, or 6 units, however you want to say that. so that's done too. So there were 4 extra values in here. So all 4 of those things have been taken care of. All right, you guys go ahead and transform or describe each of these transformations. This is a mixture of all of the different kinds of transformations we've done so far. Check your U-tries before you move on to the practice, and good luck on your mastery check.